You know, I hate to do it, but I got it. Gatesgate and what's going on with DeSantis are such juicy, um, hardcore politics that I have to take a moment and admire it. As of right now, it's hard for me to see two people in this country who have a brighter political future than those two men. And frankly, I was never too sure of this, but I'm sure there were plenty of people who, at the start of this whole Gatesgate thing, would have written Gaetz in particular off and said, you know what, he's done. There we go. Turns out that he was sex trafficking a minor, or so we're told by anonymous sources, or at least we're told that he's under investigation for that. And as we know, I talked about the crazy, allegations that he then levied in the other direction, which needed to be substantiated, that he was being extorted, that this was all a fake plot. And my initial reaction was, you know what? He could just be trying to come up with a bunch of excuses, Anthony Weiner style, because he knows he's been caught, and so he's going to spin some ridiculous lie to try and do that. But what I ended up saying was that, you know what, the story that he's coming up with, his explanation here, is something that's plausible and something that's happened before. It is a tactic that I know the intelligence community has used on people in the past. And you know what? Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I just, even though I never was fond of Matt Gaetz, if anything, in the past I was very suspicious of him and his motives. There was a time not too long ago, if you would have asked me, I would have thought that Matt Gaetz was just a total grifter, riding the wave of the Trump moment. But my opinion of him as in terms of his net positive or negative effect on politics has steadily improved over time. And my analysis about the potential of this actually being a deep state plot, I'm happy to say, was echoed by Robert Barnes, who's someone who I have great respect for. Again, neither of us know this for a fact. Neither I nor Robert Barnes have inside information. But the things that Matt Gaetz is saying, based on stuff that's happened in the past over the course of the history, the 20th and 21st centuries, there are historical antecedents for what Gaetz is alleging. And so that we start with that as a baseline. And over the course of this past week, more things have been coming out which corroborate his story, at least his side of the story. He released these documents that seemed to corroborate what he was saying. It was an extortion letter asking his father for $25 million to try and rescue Bob Levinson from Iran, which interestingly is the same amount of money that Bob Mueller asked for from Oleg Deripaska, the very same Oleg Deripaska who was implicated by Mueller in the whole Russiagate hoax. And frankly, it's so relevant at this point, I've forgotten the details about what exactly it was that Oleg Deripaska's role was supposed to be in the Russiagate thing, but I remember him from back then. And many years ago, Mueller tried to get him to pay 25, and I think he actually ended up going through with it. And then Mueller stabbed him in the back anyway later on. Paid $25 million to try and rescue Bob Levinson from Iran. And so at that point, I thought, well, I guess there's the possibility that Matt Gaetz just went into Microsoft Word and fabricated these documents to support his story. That's the only thing left. So we need some confirmation on this. Well, Bob Kent, the former spook, which, you're never really a former spook. Once a spook, always a spook. The intelligence community is not something that, it's not like a normal career that, you retire, you get a pension, and you get the gold watch. It's not like retiring from General Motors. These guys are in it for life, look at, the classic example, William F. Buckley Jr. He was in the OSS during World War II, and for his entire life, he served the interests of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so here we have Bob Kent, a supposedly retired Air Force intelligence officer, trying to extort Matt Gaetz for $25 million. He goes on Chris Cuomo's show, and he says to Chris, yep, it's all true, but I wouldn't call it extortion. Yeah, that letter, yeah, I wrote that letter, so what? It's not extortion. We just wanted money to go rescue Bob, and we knew that Gaetz had money. And you know what? We could help him out if he gave us the money. And so here we are at this point, it's all confirmed. I mean, the only thing left, really, is to determine if there actually is any supposed 17-year-old girl that's a part of this investigation anyway. Frankly, by the looks of it, what would fit the typical pattern of an intel op of this nature would be if there actually was a 17-year-old girl. And I believe I've said that before. That they normally don't try this on people if it's not true, but they essentially entrap people. I mean, that's what the FBI is famous for this. They do it with terrorists all the time. I mean, the most recent example was that the supposed plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. That was just a typical deep state entrapment plot. Epstein is a very recent example that thankfully a lot of people have recognized. Although a lot of them get lost in the billionaire pedophile title that Epstein carried. What was significant about Epstein is not just that he liked young girls; it's that he procured these young girls, invited creepy old men to his island and his various homes, and encouraged, and set these men up to have sex with these girls who, if they could think in their minds, these were not children, these were not small children, these were girls that if you really wanted to believe it, you could think to yourself, oh, they're 18. You could delude yourself into thinking that even if you knew Epstein's reputation. But it's not like these guys were, who were coming to Epstein's house for wild sex parties. They weren't checking their girls' IDs. And so it was kind of it was sort of an unspoken thing. And some of them might genuinely have had no idea that these were minors. And so that's the point of an operation like Epstein's. It's to try and entrap people. It's trying to get dirt on them. It's, whether they know that they're doing something wrong or not. Or I shouldn't say that. What they were doing is definitely wrong, but they didn't know if it was necessarily illegal or not. So in Gaetz's case, we're led to believe that Joel Greenberg, the Seminole County tax collector, set him up with, or procured some minor for him to partake in sexual relations with. Joel Greenberg, apparently, one of the many felonies that he's charged with was creating fake IDs. Well, considering that Matt Gaetz is known to pal around with young women anyway, but typically women who are adults, that's, Greenberg could have set him up with a girl who Gaetz might have believed was of the age of majority and was actually a minor. That would definitely fit the typical deep state extortion pattern. Because, once they catch you doing this, then they have the dirt on you, and then they can hold that over you to get something from you, like, let's say, $25 million to rescue Bob Levinson. But the odd thing here is that no 17-year-old girl, or I shouldn't say, she wouldn't be 17 now, she'd be over 18, whatever. No young woman has come forward to say, hey, when I was 17, I had an affair with Matt Gaetz. And this is odd, because I would have thought at this point, if there was much coordination on the anti-Gaetz side, that they would have done that. I'm surprised that, as clumsy as Gaetz's initial rollout of his defense was on Tucker, since then he seems to have found his footing and has been doing a better job being present in the media and attacking his, I can't even say accusers, because he has no accuser yet. The only people on the other side of this issue from Matt Gaetz are the people who are trying to extort him. And so that's really the last piece of the puzzle to wrap up this scandal, because so far, everything has gone in Gaetz's direction. If we just could find out whether there is a girl or not, and again, it would be strange to me if there isn't, that's the last hurdle that Gaetz has to overcome. Otherwise, I think this scandal will have only made him stronger. Because, Gaetz then will have impeccable credibility when it comes to being anti-establishment, because this is the kind of thing that the deep state comes after people for to try and shut them down. And so if Gaetz is able to survive this, I would scarcely call him untouchable at that point, but he will be much, much stronger. He will have endured, trial by fire, and he will at that point be a sort of tempered steel. And so it's very advantageous that this scandal is happening in early 2021 if he wants to run for the Commissioner of Agriculture position against Nikki Fried. And Nikki Fried, of course, only won her race because of Brenda Snipes down in Broward County, who was fudging the numbers. She was trying to steal every statewide race back in 2018, and she only was able to get in enough fake votes by the end of the night to get Nikki Fried over the line. But DeSantis, Scott, and I believe also the Attorney General of Florida was up for election that year. The Republicans were able to carry all of those, but the Commissioner of Agriculture race they lost narrowly because of Brenda Snipes' meddling. Brenda Snipes is now gone, and Florida, by all accounts, is trending more Republican, not less Republican. And so, that if Gaetz is not toxic waste by the time next year rolls around, that Commissioner of Agriculture's seat is pretty much going to be his. And it would be very interesting to see an anti-establishment person in that role, because that's very much a it's very much a pay-for-play kind of position in Florida politics, because the Commissioner of Agriculture has a unique role. The sugar, phosphate, guns, that's what the Commissioner of Agriculture deals with in Florida. And those are very big lobbies. And you never have really, in my lifetime, I've never seen an independent-minded candidate ascend to that position. And so Gaetz might actually do some interesting things in that office. But the good news for him, even though he might, my hope is that he wouldn't be just a toady for the sugar lobby and whatever other major interests that try and corrupt that office. Those interests certainly would prefer him over a Nikki Fried. The sugar lobby did not appreciate having their fiefdom stolen by Brenda Snipes. Brenda Snipes, of course, like I said, from Broward County. No agriculture in Broward County. So at the rate he's going, I think that Gaetz is taking this in stride pretty well. I will, of course, keep a very close eye on this, but I'm not going to end things there for today. I want to also discuss DeSantis, let's say his big brother in politics, who has become, I don't know if favored is the right word, but kind of heir apparent to Trump. I saw a very interesting clip of him today at a press conference, and he's very clearly receiving some high-level coaching on how to act and what to say and that sort of thing. This is, he's clearly not a purely organic politician or anything like that. DeSantis has never been, the most a naturally gifted politician by any means. Both on TV or in person, he's not. He doesn't have that natural charisma. So it is something that he's trying to learn. And normally, when politicians do that, it's a total disaster. When people try to not be themselves, normally they always come across worse rather than better. Even if they are naturally not an appealing person to begin with, having some stiff political coaching is going to just make you seem like a sleazy, stiff politician, which thankfully is not appealing to Americans these days. But the interesting thing about DeSantis here is that he's clearly being trained to act like Donald Trump, who was very loose and was very organic in his style. And so that's the interesting thing here is that DeSantis, through his coaching, is actually appearing more natural in these press conference settings. And the interesting thing is that the fact that they're having him act more like Trump shows that he has competent people around him who recognize the sorts of mannerisms about Trump that made him seem authentic to his audiences. Much more intelligent people than Trump has around him himself, because Trump's people, and Trump will say this when he's talking, he'll work very hard to hold his hands on both sides of the podium so that he doesn't use his hands when he talks, because oh my gosh, the speech coaches that Trump has around him, the normal establishment people say, oh my gosh, you can't talk with your hands. That's something unintelligent people do. Don't do that. Nobody wants to see that. Whereas, that part of Trump, him seeming like an organic person, is what people find the most appealing. And so meanwhile, while Trump is trying to stiffen himself and to seem like a normal politician, because that's what his advisors are telling him to do, DeSantis is trying to do quite the opposite. DeSantis is naturally kind of a stiff guy. He's not, he wasn't a natural-born entertainer like Trump, and yet here he is trying to embrace that side of Trump. It's an interesting dynamic. And so in addition to that, I heard a couple of dog whistles today in that minute or so clip that was making its way around Twitter from a press conference he was giving. I believe it was in Panama City Beach. But he used two terms that I recognize as sort of a long-time lurker on the right side of the internet. I don't know what you would call that. But he had two phrases in there, one which originated from Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin, and the other which came from Michael Malice. The one from Sargon that he used was, he referred to the media as smear merchants, which I thought was fantastic. I thought it was very, it was surreal almost to hear an American politician borrow a phrase from, a British YouTuber like Sargon. Now, I'm not the biggest Sargon fan, don't get me wrong, but it shows that there are people around him who, if they're using terms like that, who are plugged into internet culture. And the same goes for Malice's term that he used, which was the corporate media, although I guess Malice calls them corporate press, but the corporate adjective there is what's really significant. The fact that he would use the term corporate media shows that he is not plugged into the consultants who think, hey, what you have to do is you have to call Democrats socialists, and that's what'll help you win. If you notice, DeSantis doesn't do that too much. There's a little bit of that, because a little bit of that is appropriate. But your normal establishment Republicans, their constant attack on Democrats like Nancy Pelosi is, oh, let's call her a socialist, because that's believable. But anyway, somebody who is who does that would not refer to the media as the corporate media or the corporate press. The reason why at least why I think Malice, if I remember correctly, his justification why he developed this term and started calling them that was not only because, of course, the media is controlled by corporations, but it was sort of an implicit I'm trying to avoid swearing here, but it's a way of screwing with the left and messing with their way of thinking, because naturally they think of themselves as defenders of the little guy, which again sounds strange, and against these big powerful corporations and all this big business stuff. That's not what they're about. But of course, that's the media is a big business. Andrew Breitbart used to call it big media, just like big oil. And that's exactly the case. The fact is that the corporate media is a big special interest group. That's all they are. They're just like big oil or big tobacco or big sugar here in Florida. But they are the loudest special interest group. And they do not believe in socialist values. They believe in corporate values. They care about their bottom line. They care about, rigidity and uniformity. And so what I'm getting at here is that there are people around DeSantis who are very clearly red-pilled. And they are feeding him good advice, which is something that you don't see when it comes to politicians. We got a bit of a taste of this when it's something that Tho Bishop of the Mises Institute has pointed out, is that not only did DeSantis reject the lockdowns on the basis of just personal freedom, which is plenty good enough on its own, he actually assembled his own panel of experts who said not only, should Americans be free, but that's actually scientifically a better thing to do, because the whole lockdowns, the whole 14 days to slow the spread, is pseudoscience. And so in order to make that case, he surrounded himself with good people, smart advisors. And you just never see that in politics. And so the fact that I'm hearing his rhetoric now, the way that his, again, these are political consultants, essentially, that I'm talking about in this case, not policy advisors, who are telling him to act in a way that, to me, sounds plugged in and awake, is very promising for him politically. Because, he essentially, in that case, could do a very similar thing that Trump did. Because the way that Trump became so popular, as many people have pointed out, is that Trump just tapped into what the talk radio audience believed in better than any of the other candidates. He didn't listen to, think tank advisors. All he did was he listened to talk radio, and he repeated the stuff that they said, and that the callers said. And, he listened to that, and, he just adapted, and that was Trump's platform. But if you factor in, the modern social media zeitgeist, it gives you a lot more data to pull from. You can get much more specific. You can be much more intelligent in what you're saying. And so I think that DeSantis has a bright future ahead of him as a very effective new right politician. Not necessarily because he himself is so naturally gifted, but because he is he has people around him who understand the moment that we're in, who understands the reality of modern America, and who are willing to tap into that. So in that sense, DeSantis is different. He doesn't have that natural. I don't think he has that natural inherent understanding that Matt Gaetz has. But then again, Matt Gaetz is not. He's not all the way red-pilled. He hasn't even taken an entire red pill, let's say. I think he's, based on his public statements at least, I think he's taken like 2/3 of a red pill. But that's still better than 99.9% of all other politicians. So he kind of gets it implicitly in his head. I think that he certainly understands what's going on in this country better than Donald Trump. Again, you saw DeSantis jump on this vaccine passport thing even before it became a big issue. I heard him talking about it a couple weeks ago when he had a panel with Scott Ellis, who's whatever they were talking about. He brought up, I believe, the possibility of a vaccine passport, and he said that's not going to happen here. We're not going to implement that. And if a bunch of these companies try to jump on board with the federal government and institute it, we're going to put a stop to that too. So the fact that he was aware of the vaccine passport issue and knew that would play well with his base tells me that he's plugged in pretty well. Because I don't think that these are necessarily DeSantis's. I don't think that his personal. I don't think that he's that great of a political mind as an individual. I don't think that he's some genius or whatever. I just think that he wants to have a career, and that he's going to go the way of the voters. I mean, I remember a few years ago, he was a normal, run-of-the-mill conservative Republican, because that's what you did. And he's evolved with the times. And so that doesn't mean that I'm saying that he's necessarily a great guy on a personal level or whatever, or that he has some intellect that should be respected. All I'm saying is that he's flowing in the right direction. I think that he's making smart political moves, and that he's making political moves to appeal to me and people like me. I don't care necessarily if DeSantis is a true believer, so long as he serves my interests and the interests of people like me. And as of now, I think that, let's say you put him in as the president I would by no means think that he would be, a perfect president. But let's just compare him to Trump, for example, because Trump was a pretty good upgrade from, let's say, a Hillary Clinton or a Jeb Bush. Trump's problem was that he would get insulated in this bubble, surrounded by these, establishmentarians, and he would lose touch with his base and lose touch with what's going on in the outside world. And I think part of that was age. That he was not as well, he couldn't be as well connected into what people were talking about, on 4chan and whatnot, and on Twitter. Whereas someone like a DeSantis, just from a purely Machiavellian perspective, I think has a bit more of a technological intelligence, and would maintain a fleet of people around him to monitor all these spaces and to see what people like me are talking about. And I don't mean my channel in particular, because obviously my channel's minuscule, but I mean people who think like me. I guess you would include that in really anything that Malice calls the new right. So I think I'll try and cut it there. It's been a really long day. And I need to go get this uploaded. I'm probably going to... Hell, I want to be in bed before 11, hopefully. But we'll see. So I guess I'll see you folks tomorrow.